True crime, where grisly mysteries are investigated in gruesome detail, has gone from a niche interest to a full-blown obsession. But at what point do these stories stop educating and start exploiting? I'm Anelise Borges, and this is The Stream.
I think it's a red flag to watch a true crime show before bed.
I already told you. The girls that get it, get it. The girls that don't.
You think I'm crazy?
This is the case of the SpongeBob murder. In 1995, Jason was born in a small town in Louisiana.
I fell asleep listening to a crime podcast. I'm the girl the meme is about. It's me.
While on the hunt for a good podcast or series, you've probably come across a genre dominating popularity charts where real-life murders, kidnappings, and any other horrific event is examined and scrutinized. The narrative is such that the audience feels like it's part of the investigation, examining each new piece of evidence and uncovering parts of the mystery. Here's the question. The tough question we're going to be asking today. Has our mania about these stories blinded us to the humanity of the people at their center? We're going to put that question to our guests today. Joining us to discuss are Amanda Vicary, an associate professor of psychology and business, specializing in crime and the justice system. Terra Newell, a survivor turned advocate, producer, and life coach. Celene Beth Olsen, a producer and filmmaker focusing on true crime across film, television, and podcasts. And Bill Thomas, the co-host of the Mind Over Murder podcast and an advocate for victims. Thank you all so much for your time. Thank you for being part of the stream today. Terra, I would like to start with you because here on the stream we often focus on personal stories, and you've had a horrific experience with infamous serial predator John Meehan, known to many of our viewers because of the podcast and then the series Dirty John. I know this may be difficult, but I was going to ask you to share with us that experience and also what made you choose to work with survivors.
So when I got thrown into this space, it was a lot. But for those that don't know me, I'm Terra Newell. My stepdad, Dirty John Meehan, came after me, and I was able to defend him in self-defense. I took his life. And now I start working with survivors because it's really the next step in the healing journey for me is that post-progression is helping others. So it's really great to connect with other survivors.
That's an interesting aspect, and one I wasn't expecting you to say, but we're going to hear more about your journey and how you felt to have your life depicted in so many different ways. But Bill, your podcast, Mind Over Murder, is a very personal project for you. Can you tell us more about it and about why you chose this platform to spotlight your sister's unsolved murder?
Well, my podcast partner, Kristen Dilley, and I started Mind Over Murder 5 years ago. It came about because I had been guesting as the brother of a murder victim. My sister, Kathy Thomas, and her girlfriend, Rebecca Dowski, are the first two victims in the so-called Colonial Parkway murders. After guesting on a number of other true crime podcasts, people suggested that I start a true crime podcast that would allow us to talk about the Colonial Parkway murders and many issues in true crime.
And it has become a very successful project as well. These true crime podcasts have really taken off in popularity in recent years. A Pew Research Center study found that true crime is the most common podcast topic, and 24% of the top-ranked podcasts in the US are about true crime. One very interesting aspect in terms of the audience, 73% of those podcast listeners are women. Amanda, you've done extensive research looking at why true crime as a genre is so popular, especially among women. What were your findings, and why would you say people are so obsessed with true crime?
Well, true crime has so many different elements, right, that can appeal to different people, right? There's the mystery solving element, there's the forensics, there's the emotional content, there's drama, there's psychology analysis. There's really something for everyone. And what I found about what appeals to women so much specifically was basically anything related to surviving a crime or preventing being the victim of a crime. So women really like the psychological content. What set the killer off? What red flags could I look for? Or how someone, escaped a kidnapping, or, Tara's a great example of this. How did she fight back and survive? And women especially are really drawn to this.
Indeed, it's become so successful that we've seen these series consistently appearing on top pick lists. Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, was released in 2022 and became the second most watched English language series of all time on Netflix within 1 month, dramatizing many of the real events in sometimes eerily accurate ways. Take a look at this emotional moment from Rita Isbell, the sister of one of the victims.
My name is Rita Isbell, and I'm the oldest sister of Errol Lindsay. Whatever your name is, Satan, I'm mad. This is how you act when you are out of control. I don't want to ever see my mother have to go through this again. Never, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, I hate you. I hate you.
My name is Rita Isbell, and I'm the oldest sister of Errol Lindsay. Whatever your name is, Satan, I'm mad. This is how you act when you are out of control. Now, I don't want to ever have to see my mother go through this again. Never, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, I hate you. I hate you. This is out of control. Don't with me, Jeffrey.
And so these depictions opened up the floor for discussions about consent, but also about the psychological toll on victims and their families. Rita Isbell watched some of the show and said that she felt like she was reliving everything all over again. She actually said, and I quote, "I was never contacted about the show. I feel like Netflix should have asked if we mind or how we felt about making it. They didn't ask me anything, they just did it. But I am not money hungry, and that's what this show is about, Netflix trying to get paid." Celene, I want to bring you in because you've produced acclaimed true crime documentary series for major networks. Have you seen a push to look at the ethical concerns, the ethical implications involved in essentially making entertainment out of what is often someone's worst moments ever? Has the industry evolved at all in that respect, especially with this rise in popularity?
I wish I could say that they have, but it has not. In terms of what I have worked on, consent is very much at the top of the list of what ethical production would be. Rita Isbell is a perfect example. She is somebody who's so resilient, and she offered this example of not being contacted, given this type of consent. We also just saw this again with the Menendez brothers documentary series, along with the Ryan Murphy scripted series. To my understanding, the scripted series did not offer any type of consent, really painted Eric and Lyle in a fashion that was not appropriate, according to Eric, who released a statement through his wife, Tammy Menendez. So when we're looking at consent and ethical practices, this is something that I am really trying to pioneer in terms of production. Thankfully, I have worked for wonderful production companies who take that consent very seriously, but I do think there is this ethical immorality, if you will, about the type of content that we are consuming when it is done by, people who do not want this type of content out there about their lives. This is truly a traumatic moment for them.
I guess Tara is well equipped to talk about that. As we mentioned at the start, the traumatic events you experienced were turned into a hit podcast with over 170 million listeners and a successful series on Netflix. What is it like when your story such a difficult moment for you and your family goes viral like that. Were you and your family involved in either of the productions?
I was lucky to be involved in my production as a consultant. However, I was told that they were going to make the series with or without me.
Oh, wow.
And I found out earlier that they were actually selling the podcast, Dirty John. And so it was already planned that it was going to be a podcast instead of an 8 series of articles with the LA Times. And so it was really interesting that I didn't even know that my traumatic incident was being pitched out there to be sold.
Yeah, that's a nice way of inviting you. We're going to do it anyway if you want to participate. Bill, I was wondering if for you this was part of, creating this podcast was also part of owning the narrative and bringing it back to your family a little bit to try and honor the story of your sister.
It absolutely was. Something I admire about Terra is that she has begun to control the narrative. It's her story, and she deserves to be the person that tells it. She and I met very briefly, but I didn't have an opportunity to convey that. At the same time, starting Mind Over Murder is our attempt to get out correct information about my sister's case and the talk about the Colonial Parkway murders, but also talk about other issues in true crime. But it's certainly an attempt on our part to get the story straight, to keep it victim focused, and quite frankly, to put pressure on the FBI and the Virginia State Police to put resources into an unsolved series of murders that involves at least 8 young people. Only one of the 4 double homicides in the Colonial Parkway murders has been solved so far.
And I'm gonna get you to give us an update on that. But I just want to also bring in another aspect, because there are many independent creators on YouTube and TikTok who are approaching their content in a different way. We spoke to Seoul-based journalist turned YouTuber Megan Lee about her process. Take a look.
I definitely try to be mindful of the ethical concerns when I'm choosing cases and writing scripts. True crime is a fascinating genre, but at the end of the day, these stories are about real people, victims, their families and communities who've gone through something truly tragic. So I always try to remind myself of that and try to approach everything with as much respect and sensitivity as possible. And because of my journalism background, I take a more factual and research-based approach to storytelling. I focus on delivering accurate information without adding too much of my own imagination or speculation. I believe it's important to let the story speak for itself rather than dramatizing it unnecessarily. I also pay a lot of attention to how cultural differences play a role in the cases I cover. Since I focus on Asian stories, I think it's really important to explain things like cultural values, legal systems, and societal reactions so people can get a better understanding of what's happening without falling into stereotypes. I do believe that true crime can serve as a way to educate and create awareness about important social issues. I want people to learn something and walk away with a deeper understanding of the case, not just watch for entertainment. I think it's all about finding that balance between creating interesting content and making sure it's done the right way.
Bill, your take here on what Megan just mentioned there in terms of true crime being more than just entertainment. You've been talking about how it's been almost 40 years and the case remains unsolved, your sister's case. But recently there's been some traction in identifying a suspect. Can you give us the latest update on that? But also, if you think that the podcast has helped in any way to find some of the answers?
Well, I'm absolutely certain that the podcast has helped because we try to keep the media focus and that spotlight on the fact that the Colonial Parkway murders are still largely unsolved. I can't tell you how many people I've met. This case took place in Virginia. People will say to me, oh, I thought that case was solved. Or they'll even mention a suspect and they'll say, oh, wasn't he the guy? And people are not aware of the fact that these cases remain unsolved. There's 300,000 unsolved homicides currently in the United States in the cold case category. If you don't kick up a fuss, if you don't put pressure on law enforcement to talk about what's going on, these cases die. We have had a significant development. It's a year ago now that the FBI and the Virginia State Police announced a partial solve in the Colonial Parkway murders. But at the same time, they wouldn't admit publicly that there were links between that offender who died in 2017 and the other Colonial Parkway murders. It's only after the families and our podcast and other media people called out the FBI and the Virginia State Police that they began to admit that, oh, well, yes, this suspect also is linked to the other Colonial Parkway murders. It shouldn't take the brother of a murder victim to keep law enforcement informing the public, but that's what it's come down to.
Wow. But it is a fascinating aspect of the power, I guess, right, that these podcasts actually hold. Amanda, there's been some extraordinary instances where a story that has been brought into the spotlight by a documentary or a series or a podcast has actually resulted in the case being reopened. Can true crime, you think, be a tool for social justice?
Absolutely. I mean, look at what Bill is doing, trying to draw attention to unsolved cases. So when you think about podcasts or documentaries that are focused on wrongful convictions, unsolved cases, finding missing people, all of those things are generally used for good. We have seen attention brought to, flaws in the justice system that people are pushing to be remedied. People, pushing for individuals to get out of prison. People, turning up clues for unsolved murders. And I think when you have situations like that, or situations where you have the victims' loved ones or the survivors themselves involved in producing and giving their consent and creating the content, then we can feel good about listening to a podcast like that.
And there are so many different aspects, also in terms of just representation, I guess. Earlier this month, here at Al Jazeera, we also launched a video podcast, True Crime Reports. Presenter Hala Mohedin gave us this insight into how they are approaching the storytelling.
On True Crime Reports, we're taking the popular true crime genre, but widening our focus to the global south and beyond, because crime affects all kinds of people worldwide. We want to spotlight countries and topics often underreported in this genre, where some stories are seen as more important than others. Too often, the missing white woman syndrome plagues news media, and this genre isn't exempt. The way we talk about crime matters, and we want to provide a new perspective and make a difference in how true crime is reported. At the heart of our series is the intention to respect the people at the centre of these events through in-depth and well-researched journalism, and to avoid sensationalism and exploitation of tragic events. The choice to use AI was an example of this more intentionally ethical approach to the genre, using AI imagery with human modification by an illustrator from the Global South.
Celene, I would like to bring you back on this because, as Hala just mentioned there, true crime is often dominated by portrayals of a very specific victim. Why do you think that is? And with so many new players and new voices and independent YouTubers and commentators involved, would you say that that is bound to change?
I would certainly hope it's bound to change at some point. But I think because this has been the landscape for so many decades at this point, it's hard for production companies, let alone networks who have specific mandates. I have seen it firsthand of networks declining a case to cover because the victim is not likable.
Wow.
This is really problematic. So when you now think about independent creators, this is why this is so important to have this landscape, so that we can hear about marginalized communities, underrepresented individuals, equally different socioeconomic backgrounds. It is very crucial for us as an industry to evolve, and I can only hope with this type of discussion we move in that direction, because it absolutely needs to change.
Terra, you actually run media courses to help people who want to get involved in true crime content creation navigate the process in an ethical way. What is the advice you give?
I say that every creator has to approach it a bit differently, because we are all different people. And as long as you're caring about the victim, you're reaching out to them or reaching out to their family, I think that that's ethical. But also, I have on Celene Beth, I have on different players to give me their answers about ethical true crime, what they think should be going on, because I think it's important to hear from us as a whole, because there are so many different creators out there that have done podcasts just amazingly. Like I had Generation Y on. They're such a great podcast. I have so many friends in this space too that talk about ethical true crime and what it is, like Sarah Turney talking about her sister's case, and how, Celene Beth and I have even been harassed by someone in the true crime space. And, it's important to support survivors and know that this is a trauma. This is something that is so heavy, and we need to respect it.
Absolutely. Amanda, is not just about the creators, though, right? There's also something to be said about us as consumers. How can we be ethical consumers of true crime?
Yeah, because when it comes down to it, companies, people are going to produce what makes them money. And not everyone is like that, but a lot are. And so it's up to us as true crime consumers to listen and watch only the things that we feel comfortable with. And you can listen to a podcast and probably in the first 10 minutes know if this is something that is approaching a respectful position. If you see that the loved ones are being interviewed, that they're involved, or they're even the producers of it, if they're not playing graphic audio of terrifying 911 calls or showing images that they should not be showing, right? There are signs that, oh, this is pushing it a little too far. Or sometimes people take too much of a casual approach. Some of these comedic podcasts are okay, and you can tell they have a good heart. But, if someone is putting on makeup while they're telling the story about someone being murdered, maybe that's not okay. I could see a loved one of a victim feeling a little more uncomfortable than that. And so basically we vote with our wallets and what we tune into and what we listen to. And advertisers are going to go to the most popular podcasts. We as consumers decide what is popular, and we can choose to focus on the podcasts and the shows that are paying attention to the victims, that are respectful, that are focusing on broader issues, survival, solving unsolved crimes, wrongful convictions.
And Bill, what is your take on this?
Well, this is a real struggle for me as the brother of a murder victim, because there are popular podcasts, some of whom have been around for a number of years, that include comedic elements. And I am very, very uncomfortable with this. I love to laugh. I have a life that is still filled with joy. I don't want to sound like this dour guy whose sister was killed 38 years ago, but at the same time, I'm not terribly comfortable with the mix of comedy and true crime. And several years ago, I'm not going to name names here on Al Jazeera, but the followers of a very popular true crime podcast were very much aware of the Colonial Parkway murders, and they asked the hosts to cover the case. Now, I don't think these people do a good job. And so I said on social media, I didn't say a lot, but I said, let's not.
And that is absolutely fair. Bill, Amanda, Terra, and Celene, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for helping us examine and unpack some of these issues. It was a pleasure to talk to you today. And thank you all for tuning in. Stay in touch with us online. Use the hashtag or the handle AJStream to send us your questions and suggestions. Take care, and I'll see you soon.